Well, how can we use creative skills well in the workplace? My guest today is Sara Woster. She's the author of the forthcoming book, How Painting Can Save Your Life. And she argues that it would be mutually beneficial if organizations supported artists and got the most out of them. She joins me now. Hi, Sara.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. I mean, I always ask my guests about their background, but in this case, I think it really is relevant. You are probably non-traditional for this podcast. You have a day job and you're an artist, correct?
Correct. Yeah. I went to school originally for painting, so I've been painting for many years, and then I returned to school for creative writing, and that led me into a communications career, which allowed me to kind of segue into innovation and working with teams to be more creative and finding better creative solutions. So that's kind of how I wound up here.
I mean, is this a choice to have multiple jobs to be an artist and do other things? Or is this sort of a survival thing? Because it's interesting. Now we're seeing a lot more of this in general, people doing multiple things.
It's survival. Yeah. I mean, I wish I could, and I have friends that do just solely survive on their art. And it's getting harder and harder, obviously, because it's America is not the easiest place to be an artist. There are other countries that subsidize art, have more, more funding. It's just most people I know either on a certain point in their career where they're, you know systematically selling and they can live on that and they know they have a partner who has a more traditional job, or they have like a trust fund or some magic source of money.
That'd be
I
nice.
am married to another creative, so we yeah and I actually like working. I like having a job. I like impacting organizations in certain ways. So, but if I had my choice, yeah, I would be painting all day long, writing all day long. But that's I'm okay with my current reality.
Okay, so it's the reality for a lot of people, right? They
Yeah.
may have an art background or music background or some kind of creative background where it's not their first choice to be working in a tech company or in advertising or whatever, but they're there. So,
Mhm.
as a group, what do you think they're bringing there?
Oh, I think it almost makes me sad to think about what they could be bringing versus what they are bringing. Um, I've worked at some great organizations where everyone is aware of what's outside skills or what previous skills people are bringing in that maybe are not aligned with their job title, and they're able to tap into that. Like, they know that someone is making films on the side, and so they ask them, they bring them in on more creative projects. But I'm afraid there's even more times when that is either a secretive part of someone's life, it's not thought of as a valuable tool. I mean, we hear over and over about these famous studies about there's a creativity crisis, that
Hmm.
that I think it's the Torrance score, that every year we've been going down on that, like it tests creativity. And it's really terrifying as a country that relies on innovation, as a world that relies on innovation, to know that in America, at least, the creativity figures are going down. And so I think, like, when you have an artist in house and they're not being brought into teams in the way that they're creative problem solving, I think that's a real loss. I think any company that is doing that, and yeah, I mean, ad agencies, which I in my past was an art producer, was a photo producer, so I worked in many agencies. They're set up a little bit better because you have an entire department that is aligned with creativity. Like, there's the idea that you can be a artist and come in here and make a living and work in that thing. But if you think about it, I specifically was drawn to write the piece in Fast Company when I read this figure that we have 3,000 days to half our emissions. And I thought, how are we going to do that? Like, I mean, to me, it's like, if we aren't having artists working with scientists on that, I don't know how it's going to scale, because I think what artists do so well is creative problem solve and creative creative solutions and creative new pathways and new ways of working. So I think yeah, I think anywhere that an artist is being brought in to be a part of a team that's solving a problem, that's the best case scenario. The worst case is where they're quietly doing their tasks that were listed on their job application, or and nothing else. I think that's just a waste of talent.
Okay, so how do you solve this? Because I've heard managers, I think of somebody very high up in finance who said, look, we hire all kinds of backgrounds. We hire people who graduated in music. We want lots of different thought processes here. But, I think they probably do fail to tap into this. How do you do this? Because is it just the wrong metrics? Are we counting the wrong things?
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, metrics is an interesting way to like, are we viewing success at your job in the correct way? Like maybe it is not tasks completed, maybe it's ideas generated. Maybe we need to, from the get-go, ask different questions on intake forms. Like maybe one part of your intake is you have to spill all the beans on your creative superpowers so that when the time comes you can be pulled in for the right thing. I personally think it's a lot to do with training people to think differently, setting it up to brainstorm constantly, just as part of your week is just brainstorming, because I think when that goes away you're missing so many countless opportunities. And I think also it's a leadership that is there to listen to creative ideas and then be champions for them. Because I'm sure there are many people sitting in an organization or a business or a government thinking that they have a much better idea to do something. And if they're a creative artist person, it might be a really interesting idea, but they're not going to maybe vocalize it. So I think it's a lot about culture. It's about team building. Like you should embed an artist in every major team. You should have an artist going in for pitches. You should have an artist going in to look at your presentation deck. You should have an artist going in to look at human resources. How are you training people? What questions are you asking? How are you, I come from a PR background. We do writing tests. Like, are those the right kind of writing tests? Are we looking for the right things and pulling the right things out of people?
Interesting. You mentioned the Fast Company article you wrote, and which is where I first saw your thoughts. I mean, you think companies should go after this absolutely, like in a really positive way, say we want artists, we want these skills, and you think they should in some ways accommodate them. Like, tell us about that.
Oh yeah, I think you can't. I think it's very hard for somebody who has a creative practice that they're really serious about to keep that practice going with 40 hours a week. I think it could be a trade-off. We're living in a world of gig economy. Maybe it's more freelance, bringing in more freelancer artists that actually just come in for a short period of time. Maybe they work half time so that they can still have their creative practice and they don't kill the very thing that you're bringing them in to bring value to your organization. Yeah, I think that to me, I think anywhere you can enhance the creativity instead of squashing it, that's what you want to do, because otherwise you might as well not bring the people in. I think I'm a big supporter. I think we need to look at new HR practices, new compensations, new benefits. Like, I mean, it was somebody at some point said we should be paying for a gym membership, and that was a brilliant idea because it impacts the health and mental health of employees. But I feel the same way. I mean, I have so many friends who a part of the way they survived this pandemic was a ceramics practice, or not necessarily, they wouldn't think of themselves as artists, but I do, and they are career people in business, but they have these outside interests that fuel them and make them better at their job. And I think compensating people for that, giving gifts that are related to creativity. I think there's so many ways that we could be bringing in resources into companies. I write in there, like I know, like writing workshops have been a huge part of my life, and I'm not sure if you've ever taken one, but they're a really great community builder, and they're a really great way to make people really engage with the creative practice. That would be so easy to have a writing instructor come in for a lunchtime once a week, and whoever wants to could participate. I mean, there's endless ways to support creativity that I think would be super interesting. And also in an era of talent, the talent wars, I think to make it clear that you value creativity and the artist practice in that way, in those type of ways, is a huge selling point as an artistic person.
Well, we're just starting to realize some of this. I mean, I think just before the pandemic, I started reading about how galleries and artistic endeavors, or just going to concerts or whatever, is good for mental health. That people were starting to use it as therapy per se. And it's interesting that you bring this in to the corporate context that you think it's positive for organizations to encourage this, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's I mean, that's why I call my book Painting Can Save Your Life, because I really am a true believer in the power of making art to you know, make your mental health better. In fact, when I volunteer with an organization called Friends of the Firefighters, which is they work with the FDNY to provide mental health and wellness services. And they realized that they didn't have a creative service. They have Reiki, they have acupuncture, they have talk therapy, they have all these wonderful things, massage, but they didn't have a creative practice. And they realized that's one way of wellness for many people. And so they implemented a painting program. Um, I think it's probably incredibly underestimated, but I think if we start looking for, like, the cost is the same as a Peloton bike, you know, I mean, like, that is, for some people, that's the equivalent of staying sane when things are are wild. And I think it's an added benefit of that creativity is then fueled. And you know, in the article I talk about, there's a lot of business leaders and there's a lot of Nobel laureates who, they might be a scientist, but they have the creative practice definitely fueled their success. You know, I talk about David Solomon from Goldman Sachs. He's a DJ. You know, I mean, there's no way that because he thinks creatively on his off hours, that doesn't impact the way he views the world. You know, there was a study, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the professor. It's a professor in Norway, did a study of tracking the eye movement of artists when they look at a drawing versus non-artists. The non-artists look, say it's a painting of a house, you know, on a hill. They're looking at the house on the hill, whatever. The artist looks at the entire, they can track their eyes are looking throughout. It's just an entirely different way of seeing. So when you're building up those skills and that way of thinking, then you're going to approach everything like that. You are going to see flaws in an operational system that someone else might not see. You're going to see a missing link in a team. You're going to see something in a presentation. And so, I mean, it's a feedback loop, right? Creativity is just, you got to feed it and then it'll come back out.
It's interesting. So suppose you're somebody who doesn't even think of themselves as particularly creative. However, you're stressed and you're looking for an outlet and you're willing to try this. How do you go about this?
Yeah, that's such a good question because it's so intimidating. It is
It is.
incredibly intimidating. I think a group, I am a huge fan of group creative activities. So like where I live in Brooklyn, there's a ceramic center that is become this, you can't even get space in it. It's become such a welcoming part of people feel comfortable making that first step. You're going to go in, you know, you've never done it, but there's a room full of people who haven't done it. It's a lot less effective, and I personally think, to try something on your own. I think it's really hard to make that, you know, get over the learning curve by yourself. So I'm a big believer. There's almost every community has an art center. I can't, you know, every across the country they have art centers. They have you can sign up for online, like in New York, we have like the Gotham Writers Workshop. You can sign up for an online if that's more convenient. You can go in person. A lot of Ys have writing groups, knitting circles at, you know, yarn and fabric stores, quilting. I highly recommend doing it as part of an in-person or online class, just because I think it's really hard to do by yourself. And then, you know, and then I think it's a confidence game too, right? Like, other people that you're with, you see they're also learning, they're also kind of struggling, they're also maybe not making the best stuff at first, and then together you collectively tend to improve, and then you get your confidence.
I'm sure the argument you hear back though is, I don't have time for this. Not a good argument, right?
It's a terrible. But I do think too, that's another place I feel like if you are an organization and you want to make room for artists, maybe you allow a little bit of time for that practice. Maybe you find a way to give a few hours each week if it's important to someone to you know, sneak out, you know, for, I know, I mean, I'm sure you do, you work places where people not sneak out, but they go out their lunchtime to go to the gym, or, you know, run into a Pilates class or something. I think that same spirit of like making time for it in the week is important. Like, you know, let your team know this is cool. If you're doing these, we support these, we value this. If you need to you know, not do meetings on Thursday evening after 4 because that's when your writers group is, that's great. We're going to support that, you know, just as you would support other wellness initiatives like talk therapy.
Interesting, Sarah. We'll have to see how it comes together, because we are getting to a point where we will have more of a gig economy. You mentioned this earlier. And maybe people will make time in their lives for this, or maybe they'll be more stressed and they won't. Hopefully it'll go the right way, right?
I hope so.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Anyway, thank you so much for talking to me about it.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. It was so nice to talk to you.
Sara Woster is author of the forthcoming book, Painting Can Save Your Life.